Yes, you're welcome back now. We're going on the first segment of the program this morning, and we're looking at issues in the area of financial system stability in Nigeria. And to discuss with us this morning, unusual, but we've got just one guest to chat about this, but he is ever so brilliant on this topic because this is what he does on a daily basis. So our guest is Kingsley Chiedu Moghalu, who is the Deputy Governor in charge of financial systems in the CBN today. So, Mr. Moghalu, it's great to have you on Sunrise this morning.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's start with financial systems, financial system stability. But your department, your directorate, what does it do? Because a lot of people don't really understand. This is a key part of what CBN does, but what does your directorate do?
Well, the Financial System Stability Directorate of the Central Bank plays a very important role in the central mandate of the central bank, which is to maintain both price and financial system stability. The Financial System Stability Directorate has 4 departments: the Banking Supervision Department, the Financial Policy and Regulation Department, the Other Financial Institutions Supervision Department, and the Consumer Protection Department. So the Financial System Stability Directorate is predominantly a regulatory department, regulating the banks and other financial institutions in this country. And that's the 20 commercial banks, the almost 900 microfinance banks, the 60-something finance houses, the nearly 100 primary mortgage institutions, and the almost 3,000 bureaux de change are all under the supervision and the regulation of the Financial System Stability Directorate. And there's a very important point I'd like to make, and that is that the Financial System Stability Directorate has led the implementation of far-reaching reforms to the Nigerian banking system. So basically the reforms of the Nigerian banking system, the implementation of those reforms is driven by the FSS Directorate, which I head as Deputy Governor.
Okay, when you look at the reform, yes, you said it's far-reaching, and yes. I guess the CBN and most likely the governor of the CBN has won awards for these reforms, both locally and internationally, which is commendable. Where would you put our banking system now in terms of rating? You being the person that is primary regulator of the banks in Nigeria.
Yes. Of course, when you're a regulator, you're never satisfied, and you'll be making a mistake to declare victory and go home. You work on a daily basis to ensure that a banking system remains sound, that it remains strong, because there are always constant threats in the horizon, which you must work to prevent. They're crystallizing. But I would say very, very comfortably that the Nigerian banking system is safe and sound at this point in time. We have worked very hard to make it so, and there have been some very concrete achievements out of those efforts. As you know, in 2009, when Governor Sanusi became the governor, at that time a number of banks were somewhat wobbly. I would say about 8 out of the 24 banks at that point in time. And a lot of interventions. The CBN intervened in the banking system, as you know. First, we did a clear audit to know what exactly was wrong. And we found the problems, corporate governance problems, weak risk management in the banks. Many of them were undercapitalized, and in some banks there were allegations of fraudulent diversion of depositors' funds. And in one case, of course, a court actually confirmed that. Now, since then, we've taken a number of measures that's called the reforms of the banking system, and that reform has been or stood on 4 pillars. The first pillar is to enhance the quality of the Nigerian banks, to make sure they're better governed, to make sure that the risks are managed much better, and so to make sure that there's transparency and full disclosure about their activities. So the second leg of the reforms was to ensure establish financial stability. And that is what led to the creation of the Asset Management Corporation of Nigeria, AMCON, which was driven by the central bank and the Ministry of Finance. So AMCON has played a very important role. It has been a very important tool to ensure and establish financial stability. And then you have the third leg of the reform, which is to facilitate the evolution of a healthy financial system. And there you have payment system reforms, the cashless. You also have the new banking model, where we abolished universal banking and brought back narrow banking to make sure that depositors' funds were not put at risk through, speculative trading and all that. And then the fourth leg of the reform is to ensure that banks contribute to the real economy, because we've had problems with banks mostly being engaged in speculative activities and not financing, intermediating in the real economy. So this is broadly the architecture of the banking reform.
Okay, let me take you back a bit. When
Yes.
you were describing what your directorate does,
Yes.
you mentioned supervision of banks.
Oh, yes.
And I recall that at the time of the reforms in 2009, there were plenty of issues about, didn't the CBN supervise and go to inspect these banks to notice that there were all kinds of things going on, so that they would alert the public that some of these banks were not healthy?
Yes. Now, and of course, the supervision of the banks is something that has always gone on. But you need to remember a context, and that is that in 2004, there was the consolidation of the banks. About 89 banks were consolidated into 24 banks. That was a massive exercise, a very radical and fundamental restructuring of the Nigerian banking system. And there were many issues that arose out of the consolidation, the recapitalizations of the banks and so on and so forth. And so there were questions about the capacity of the CBN in terms of supervision to keep pace with all the issues that evolved out of consolidation. And so out of consolidation, which was done with a very good intent, and of course I think fundamentally achieved its objective of creating stronger banks in Nigeria, because if you had not had the consolidation and you had the global financial crisis in 2008 with those 89 banks, many of them just toys essentially, and boutique organizations, many of them would have been wiped out. And so as at the time of the global financial crisis, at least we had real banks. Now, some of those banks were not well run. You now began to have issues about the recapitalizations of the banks, issues about bubble capital. You had some manipulations or alleged manipulations of share prices using the capital markets. You had cases where there were allegations that depositors' funds were being taken out of these banks by the creation of shell companies to which loans were granted. So it was a problem of ethics, a problem of weak corporate governance, because the boards of directors of some of these banks were not doing their duty. And so, yes, did the CBN see all that it should have seen? No, they didn't. I mean, we've owned up, we've said as an institution that the central bank, did not meet its responsibilities in full. But we are now moving forward to do so. So that's basically what it wasn't us personally, speaking as persons, but as an institution. An institution is an institution and should be able to take responsibility for its shortcomings. And we have overcome those shortcomings, I think. In fact, later on, perhaps we might talk about some of the competency, capacity building work that we're doing in the central bank and in the banking industry to make sure that this industry becomes much stronger, well-equipped for the functions it does.
If we stay on what you're talking about now,
Sure.
the creation of AMCON,
Yes.
some economists have said that what their understanding or their perception
Yes.
of what has happened with AMCON is, on the one hand, in 2008, the central bank decided that there is an economic turmoil in the world, all around the world.
Sure.
And as a result of it, our banks were having problems. So there was a bailout that was done. So we used the government money that is in the hands of CBN to bail them out. And then AMCON was created And I understand that AMCON went to the market to get bond to raise money to pay back the CBN. So
Let me
that
explain.
money, okay,
Let me explain what happened.
Okay.
In 2009, the Central Bank of Nigeria intervened in these banks, these 8 banks that were very weak. They intervened as a banker of last resort, as a lender of last resort. Fundamental role of every central bank in the world. You've seen that in Europe, you've seen that in the United States. So, the central bank is the lender of last resort, and we put in 620, I believe, billion naira as a loan to those banks to help them remain going concerns while the reforms and the recapitalizations of the banks took place. That 620 billion has been repaid to the CBN by all those banks.
Not by the banks.
No, I'm coming to AMCON. I'm coming to AMCON.
Yes,
I'm just starting from, so that the understanding is very clear and the chronology is very clear. Following the CBN intervention, there was now the creation of the Asset Management Corporation of Nigeria. The Asset Management Corporation, AMCON, is what is called a bad bank. It's been used in different parts of the world. In Malaysia, it was done, in some other countries as well. And the whole point is to use such a bank to suck out all the non-performing loans in the banking system, which were weighing these banks down and preventing these banks from starting lending. So AMCON issued bonds and bought all those non-performing loans so that those banks could now become healthy again, which is what has happened. Now, AMCON has actually been, so far, quite successful. And in fact, I would say that without AMCON, it would have been extremely difficult to resolve Nigeria's banking crisis. Nigeria has resolved its banking crisis far better than any other jurisdiction in the world. And I say that with all sense of responsibility. How? Because the money that has been used to resolve the banking crisis is not, quote unquote, government money. I want to correct you.
When you say
let me explain.
Okay,
explain
it, because I'm quite keen to
exactly.
understand.
This is what we're trying to say. So I said that they raised bonds. Now those bonds are guaranteed by the federal government. But the federal government will only have to pay for the money that has been used to recapitalize these banks or to save the banks if those bonds, if something goes wrong. But nothing has gone wrong so far. Okay, so the point I'm trying to make, I want you to understand that the point I'm trying to make to you is that the taxpayers' money, not one penny of the taxpayers' money has gone into rescuing Nigerian banks, contrary to or unlike the situation in Europe, unlike what happened in some other parts of the world. The banks in Nigeria, the commercial banks in Nigeria have contributed, and they are contributing 0.5% of their total assets every year for the next 10, 12 years to help to bail out the weak banks. So the money, and the central bank itself is putting in 50 billion naira a year into this sinking fund that was created. So I'm trying to get you to understand where the money is coming from.